do a bit of an interactive session around change management. So at Postshift, pretty much everything we do is about change. That's not surprising to anybody. So we wanted today to highlight some of the key trends we see in change management, some of the barriers to organisations achieving those kind of best practices that we see in the marketplace, and some tactics that we found particularly useful for organisations facing those barriers. So I'm joined by my colleagues, Ia, who's walking through the audience at the moment, and LJ, who was on a panel earlier today. So first of all, I'd like to give you a couple of example trends that we've seen in the market, and I'd like to know whether or not they resonate with you. Okay? So my particular favourite trend of the moment is actually about becoming more data-driven when we talk about change management. Now, being data-driven, it's quite a buzzword at the moment. Lots of people want to do it, you know, data-driven decision-making, more transparent decision-making, etc. But for me, it's particularly insightful that in a study that was done at MIT in 2005 and then updated in 2012, we saw that change programs had a 40% higher rate of success when executives saw numbers every 2 weeks rather than every 4 weeks. That's a pretty big jump. So in a world in which we can have real-time data coming out of our enterprise social networks and other kind of pulse-taking approaches to surveys, for me, becoming more data-driven should be a very logical step within change. So here's my beautiful diagram. They made me draw things. I apologise wholeheartedly. But for me, data is not just about showing the numbers. It's about showing the pulse of the organisation. What's going on inside? What's the heartbeat? What's the health looking like? And you can do that by taking the pulse in lots of different projects and wrapping that into a kind of executive dashboard which people can look at more often. And it should be real time, to be clear. This isn't your classic kind of once a month reporting. Ia, what's your favourite trend of the moment?
Hi. So my favourite trend, I think, is actually quite an old one. But we tend to see that organizations are struggling with disruptive change and they can't figure out what to do. Startups are happening, new technologies are coming on board, what to do. So there is a change of organizations starting to have start new initiatives where they try to figure out how they can use these new entities to create new innovations and new products. So I think Vatkla mentioned that as Skunk Works or Project X, and I think we've seen that in the last 50 years. But the biggest change here is that we see a change where organizations are not only trying to figure out what's the new product innovation, they're also trying to use this as a way to change the company culture and to get like a more entrepreneurial behavior into the organizations. So part of what we do is that we talk with a lot of people who work with change in organizations, and what we've found is that there's a slight difference between how you work as a change agent in a big organization and how you work as a change agent if you're on a rocket or if you're in a new entity that's trying to not only launch new products but also to generate a new culture. So I find that as an interesting trend in change.
So the trend that I've chosen in change management, so I used to be a project manager for my sins, and traditionally, or certainly 5 years ago when I first started, change management's used a programmatic approach. So we're at A, we want to get to B, there's a business case, it's all mapped out, it's going to take 3 to 5 years, it's going to cost this much, it's got this many benefits, get your senior stakeholders to sign on the dotted line and let's get going, and that's how it works out. But I mean, we all know that actually that's not how it ever worked out in change management. You had nothing ever produced exactly what it... this is where our no slide falls down. Nothing ever really worked out how you intended it. Oh, okay. The blue tax is just up there. Sorry. Oh, okay, cool. So nothing really worked out like that. It either cost, went over budget, overran, didn't produce the benefits, or whatever. So instead, what we're seeing is a trend towards agile, iterative approaches. So this is my attempts at visualizing it, and as you can probably tell, none of us are artists. But what I've got here is the sea of VUCA. Those conditions are the kind of waves and the surf. It's kind of code for it's really crazy out there. We can't predict anything. What we actually need is a vehicle whereby whoever's driving that vehicle, our surfboard, it's enabling autonomous decision making, one that we're in control of. It's basically also coupled with a focus, which is this dotted line getting to what Bjorn's hiding, which is the goal, dry land. So basically, the idea is we won't just glide in a straight line to that goal. The surfer has to make constant decisions and course correct in order to successfully achieve that, complete the journey and conquer the waves and the sharks. That is a shark, in case you couldn't tell. And one of the ways you can do that, and there's various different methodologies, like the OODA loop, but I've got here the DOT loop, which is do, observe, think on a constant basis over and over again until you achieve the outcome that you're driving for. So essentially what the picture's trying to represent is the trend around change management moving to be far more responsive to the external dynamics of the waves. And it's not just about following the plan, but it's about making sure that organisations are flexible enough to adapt on the frequent basis to achieve outcomes.
So they're our favourite trends. Can anyone from the audience give me one or two that they're particularly fond of at the moment? What are they seeing a lot? What are the biggest trends you're seeing in change? We won't ask you to draw them. We promise we won't ask you to draw them. Anybody? Don't make me pick on you, because I know quite a lot of you in here, and I will. Come on. Del. I threatened. I threatened. Okay. And lack of ownership. Yeah. Yeah, I'll change, but I don't explain that. Okay. I'll change when everything else changes. Yeah, so maybe not being willing to take the accountability for change. Okay? Who else? Anetta.
Yeah, we discussed already
after
lunch. So I will address the topic I see, and it's visible more or less outside Bosch as well. We figured out that with Smart Factory Industry 4.0 in German, IoT, we somehow forgot to interlink and to include the people or the workers into our networking or networked machines or interlinked machines. So now the trend obviously is to figure out how to put these people into networks afterwards. So doing the Enterprise 2.0 on shop floor.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating challenge for change. And I think not only within factories, but also, Del, correct me if I'm wrong, that's one that you see a lot with frontline workers. So people in care homes, people doing visits and that kind of thing, involving them in change efforts can be challenging, but incredibly rewarding. So I think that's definitely a trend we'll see as we move forward. All right, so, yes, sorry, Kim.
I was going to say change fatigue.
Yeah?
Because we're constantly changing, and I think that for us at Pearson is definitely one of the roadblockers for us, and it is an ongoing trend, and it's not going to go away. But we've had a discussion on our own ESN this week about the change and who's responsible for the change, and if we're not going to change, if we're not going to stop changing, then what's the support in place for that?
I think that's a great point. And I was reading a really interesting piece by Mintzberg earlier this week, where he was talking about the kind of counterbalance to change becoming anarchy is continuity. And if people focus on change without focusing on the continuity that needs to happen as well, actually, you end up in bad places, as you would if you focused on purely continuity without change. So I think it's a great, great example. All right, so if there are trends in change and things that we all want to be aspiring to as we enter change programs, what are the barriers that you see in your organisation to be able to move towards those? What are the things that cause resistance?
Lack of leadership.
Yeah, and I think that would be probably one of the biggest barriers.
I guess so, but then with that, then you've got to look at vision, mission, values. You've then got the strategic plan.
Yep.
Non-fulfillment of the strategic plan.
Yep.
Yeah. A lack of accountability and ownership within senior management, middle management, and then general employees.
Yep.
Where do you want to start?
There are one or two barriers, yeah, and where you start in that hierarchy of kind of barriers.
The way the Japanese work, the Chinese
Yes.
work on 30 to 50-year business plans.
Yep.
And we're struggling actually to get companies to work with
3.
1 year,
Yeah.
3 months, 3 years.
Yeah. So one of the things that I was thinking about while you were giving your talk, Alan, was that if you look at the list of the longest running companies in the world, most of them are either German or they're Japanese and Korean. Yeah. And I think that's absolutely fascinating from a culture perspective. And as you say, long-term planning. Yes. Yes, absolutely.
And we should be learning from them.
Yes, very much so. So yeah, leadership is a great barrier. Damien. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, so the process engine that has to keep going in order to achieve those targets. Anybody else? Yes.
I was going to say fear.
Okay.
People are afraid of change.
And do you think that operates at any one level in the organisation more than others, or do you think that's a general?
I think if it happens at certain levels of the organisation, that fear can perhaps trickle down or even up, and that can be a big barrier.
Yeah. So one of the interesting counterbalances we see to formal leadership not getting change or being scared of change is the emergence of influencers. And there's quite a lot of influencers in this room, people in their organisations who have gained respect through trying things, failing, standing back up and trying again. And I think that's a really interesting kind of area for change to look at. Anyone else? Barriers to change in your organisation?
And I think one of the... I don't know. Do I need it? One of the things that I've experienced, at least in talking to a lot of change agents, is that one of the main barriers is finding the people in your organization who share the same thoughts as you. So finding your like minds. Because in large organizations, it's not necessarily popular to say the thoughts that you have out loud. So you need to kind of find those mediums or those meetings where you can actually like identify who it is that you can later kind of make a collaboration with and try to push back on some of these things. So I think, at least from my perspective, that's a barrier.
And I think one of the most successful examples of that would be someone like John Stettner at Deutsche Bank, who, you know, the whole purpose of working out loud was originally for him to identify like minds who he could connect with and to create a strong network, then helping other people to do that by working out loud, by narrating what they were doing, helping to get other people involved. That's kind of spiraled into, well, an entire new career in John's case. But I think that's a really strong technique for removing some of those barriers. So working out loud as an actual working method rather than just the popular thing we all talk about at the moment. Okay, so we flagged one. Yeah, sorry.
Surely employee engagement is a bit of a problem here. If people don't really give a monkeys about the company, they're not going to bother changing.
Yeah, so one of the things that a lot of the techniques we try to use to counteract the barriers to change are about being able to push decision-making down the hierarchy, to engage people, to give them a voice at the table, to make them feel like, to get people involved and to help them make decisions on behalf of their business towards actual business goals rather than KPIs that, you know, are all well and good but don't necessarily move the needle. So what tactics have been successful in your organisations in counteracting some of these barriers to change?
I did a huge change program back in... I did a huge change program with a company in the early 2000s. The company was failing, £30 million. That's not too much of a figure, but 12 offices running 28 countries, Middle East and Africa. Company was seriously in decline. I had everything at my disposal, from corruption to, well, you name it. It was a complete disarray. To get a change program, believe it or not, to get that executed, I think there were two things that I identified straight away, which were, doing a SWOT analysis on 12 countries and being able to report that back to the New York board was incredibly important. To buy in their trust and their confidence, number one. But two, also, the condition of me doing the change program was that my boss would not micromanage or would not get involved, because we were up against some pretty stiff issues in doing that, number one. Number two was maintaining, now bearing in mind that one of the major offices I had was in Holland and Benelux, and the employment laws within that area. I had to be incredibly careful. I did have Baker's McKenzie at my disposal, but I still had to tread carefully with regards to changing titles, changing people in organizations, and that was a tough measure. So maintaining an existing strategy, and actually executing and implementing a tier 2 strategy for the eventual change was incredibly, that's a balancing act. A balancing act. But the third direct result was being able to support all of the 12 offices with all of the issues that came about as a direct result of the SWOT analysis. And then re-KPIing the company at unprecedented levels took me to £100 million plus in 2 years. So, there was a lot of work involved, but I just thought I'd share that because there's a couple of good instances there.
Yeah, so if I summarise kind of a couple that stood out for me in that is, firstly, we've talked a bit about storytelling, how powerful storytelling can be today, but actually for me, it's not just stories, it's stories and data. Because data is good for middle managers and senior managers. Stories are great for all the levels of the organisation. So I think combining those two makes that a more powerful message. Yeah,
and just to finish on that, I think the most powerful thing I did getting 12 countries together under one banner was actually to relaunch the company with a new vision, mission, and set of values, and a complete new tone of voice, which brought collaboratively together the whole of Europe, Middle East, and Africa with, as one of my sales directors said in Portugal, Jeff, you've created a new religion here. And emotionally, I got a lot more out of my team, particularly in sales, driving sales performance as a direct result of working together, achieving together, and delivering together. It was good.
Yeah, so I think individual motivation, understanding individual motivations within your organisation and the profiles that they have. We know there are kind of typical motivational profiles for salespeople that are going to be very different to engineers. And actually playing to those strengths rather than worrying about the weaknesses of that model, I think would make it much more powerful. Who else has a tactic that they've used in their organisation to change or to move past change barriers? Annetta, can you tell us anything about your reverse mentoring program at Bosch?
I don't think that this will really help to remove that.
Yeah.
Reverse mentoring helps a little bit to get inspiration and to reduce the barriers.
Yeah.
And if there is no intrinsic motivation for the managers to see benefits for themselves, for instance, to do a regular blogging or something like that, we have not that respect for the managers. We try to make it, and we have an extraordinary program for that.
Yeah.
There is a German word.
You could go for the German word.
Perhaps in
Yeah. Yeah, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Absolutely. Yeah. I think I think it should be recognised that that's a much longer journey as well, and a single technique can't ever help an organisation, all the leaders in the organisation of a company like Bosch. Kim.
So probably not as formalised as a reverse mentoring, but something I'm going to talk about in my session is really how we were trying to upskill our leaders around being digitally savvy, especially around social media. And I think one of the things that they really was a challenge, and I think we discussed it this morning, was their fear. Not fear of what would happen, not fear of the tool itself, but fear of just not knowing how it works and how, if they start tweeting, they open the floodgates, and what if they make a mistake, because they're obviously highly visible. So we kind of guided them very, very closely, setting our L1s and L2s through that process. And I think it definitely changed the way that people felt that they could then speak up and talk about Pearson externally. And we're now trialling Elevate with LinkedIn as a way to start telling the Pearson story. And I think that's been really helpful. But setting the leaders up to succeed in that definitely helped pave the way for the rest of the organisation.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think one of the things we learned on a recent project, actually, LJ and I, was we talked to people a lot about digital literacy and social literacy, and we find quite a lot of resistance to that idea. And actually, a simple semantic change to talk about digital fluency was much better received, simply because, well, of course I'm literate. I can use programs and things, but actually fluency has a very different kind of overtone, and that played very well with leadership. So I think that's good. Sorry, Bjorn, how long? Okay, good. Thank you very much for all of your contributions. We appreciate it very much, and apologies for calling you guys out who I did. I probably owe you a drink or something. Any last comments from you guys? I'm looking at you, Ian, and you, LJ. No.
Thank you, Cerys. Thank you, Ria. Thank you, Laura.